She escaped to the mountains to avoid being chosen, but the Triplet Alpha brothers had other plans. Leora tightened her cloak around her shoulders, the fabric doing little to protect her from the chill that cut deeper than the wind ever could. She had left behind the world she knew, the stone city walls, the gilded halls, the whispers of being chosen. She had run not out of fear alone, but out of defiance, out of the stubborn need to control her own fate. She had heard the stories all her life. Every generation, a chosen was marked, destined to serve the mysterious triune pact, a bond that tied one human soul to the ruling triplets of the kingdom. It was a privilege, they said, an honor, and yet in her family it had always been a curse. Her mother had spoken of the pain, the sacrifices, and the tragedies that followed those who submitted to the pact. Leora had no desire to carry that weight, so she had fled. Her feet crushed the frost-laden earth as she climbed higher into the mountains, where the trees thinned and the air turned sharp and brittle. Rocks jutted like jagged teeth from the earth, and mist curled around them like spectral fingers. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Every step backward meant a return to chains she would never forgive. The first night, she found a small cave, hidden behind a thicket of frost-kissed shrubs. Inside, she built a fire, its light trembling against the rough walls. She had brought little with her, a loaf of bread, some dried fruit, a flask of water, but she had enough to survive for a few days. She sat by the fire, letting the warmth creep into her bones, and allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She was free, or so she thought. Shadows flickered at the edge of her vision. The mountains were alive, though she did not yet understand how. Strange sounds echoed through the night, whispers carried on the wind, the scrape of claws against stone, the faint rustle of movement just beyond the firelight. Leora's hand went to the small dagger at her belt. She was not afraid. She would not let fear control her, but she was cautious. The pack's reach was long, and the Triplet brothers would not let their chosen escape so easily. They were said to be unmatched in strength and cunning. Each of them carried an air of danger, yet of magnetism that could twist the heart in unexpected ways. Leora had heard the tales, felt them as she grew, and the thought of their gaze upon her had once made her shiver. Now, alone in the mountains, she felt the tension tighten like a coil in her chest. She had escaped the palace, but she had not escaped destiny. Night passed in uneasy quiet, the fire dwindling to embers. When dawn broke, she climbed higher, seeking vantage points, seeking safety. Her eyes caught the horizon where the sky met jagged peaks, painted in soft pinks and pale golds, but even in such beauty danger lurked. She had noticed footprints earlier, faint and deliberate, pressed into the frozen ground. Not human alone, they had an air of authority, a precision in their pattern. The triplets were coming. She knew it without needing confirmation. Her mind raced. Could she outrun them? Could she survive in the mountains, alone, against forces she barely understood? She shook her head, trying to dispel the panic that threatened to rise. Survival demanded clarity, and fear would only cloud her judgment. She had lived long enough to know that. Hours later, as she navigated a narrow path along a cliff edge, a shadow fell across the rocks below. Leora froze, breath caught in her throat. She looked down, heart hammering. A figure stood below, his silhouette defined against the rising sun. Tall, strong, and exuding a quiet, commanding presence, he watched her with eyes that seemed to see through the layers of her defiance. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said, deep, calm, yet laced with something dangerous. Leora straightened, gripping her dagger tighter. "I go where I please," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "I answer to no one." The figure tilted his head slightly, as if amused. "The mountains are not your home, chosen. They are my domain and theirs." He gestured vaguely, and Leora realized he meant not just the mountains, but his brothers as well. "They will come for you, whether you want them to or not." She held his gaze, unwilling to show the flicker of fear. "Then let them come." "I am ready." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips, almost imperceptible. Courage is admirable, but stubbornness, that can be dangerous. Before she could respond, a distant roar echoed through the mountains, a sound that made the hair on her arms rise. It was not animal, not entirely. It carried a power that vibrated through the stone beneath her feet. The man's eyes narrowed and he shifted, preparing for something unseen. Leora's pulse raced. What is that?" "The mountains speak," he said simply. "And they are warning you." Her mind spun. She had heard whispers of spirits, guardians, and ancient forces that protected the peaks, but she had not believed them. Now, faced with the echo of that roar, she did not doubt. She felt it, a cold, living presence judging her, measuring her worth. The figure descended toward her, each step deliberate, controlled. Leora tensed, ready to defend herself. But as he approached, she noticed something unexpected. There was no malice in his gaze, only a complex mixture of caution, curiosity, and longing. Her stomach tightened. How could longing exist in one so imposing, so dangerous? "You cannot hide forever," he said, stopping a few paces away. "The triplets will find you, but perhaps there is another way." Leora frowned. "Another way? What do you mean?" He did not answer directly. Instead, he extended a hand toward her, not demanding, not threatening, but inviting. "Trust is dangerous," he said softly, "but sometimes necessary." Her heart ached with the weight of the choice before her. Trust had always led to betrayal in her life. Her family's curse, the pact itself, all had proven that. And yet, she sensed in this stranger, this first brother, a strange honesty, a strange protection. Could she allow herself even a flicker of hope? Before she could make her decision, a sudden crash of stone echoed from above. Leora spun, eyes wide, as a shadow passed across the cliff's edge. Another figure, taller, broader, more lethal in presence, emerged, landing gracefully on the rocks. His gaze locked onto her, intense and unwavering. And then another. The third figure appeared, quiet, almost spectral, yet radiating a presence that made her stomach knot with both fear and awe. The three of them, triplets, bound by blood and duty, stood before her, each distinct, each powerful, each watching her as if she were a riddle they had long sought to solve. Her mind raced. She had fled to avoid this moment, and yet it had arrived with inevitable force. The mountains seemed to hold their breath along with her. The first brother's hand remained extended, an unspoken offer of parley or protection. The second's eyes were sharp, calculating, assessing her strength, her courage. The third's gaze was different. He looked at her as though he recognized something buried deep within her soul, something that had nothing to do with the pact and everything to do with destiny. Leora swallowed, gripping her dagger tighter. I will not be taken," she said, voice trembling slightly despite her efforts. "I will not be your chosen." The first brother's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "No one ever does willingly," he said. "But the mountains and the pact have a way of making choices for us." A cold wind swept through the peaks, carrying with it the echo of the first roar, louder now, closer, unstoppable. Leora felt the ground tremble beneath her feet, as if the very mountains themselves were alive, judging her, warning her, daring her to flee. And in that moment she realized with a chill that running might no longer be enough. She was no longer alone. She was being hunted and perhaps in some unfathomable way watched over. The triplets moved as one, yet each with his own rhythm encircling her, their presence both terrifying and magnetic. Leora's heart pounded, caught between fear and fascination. She had escaped the palace, she had escaped destiny, and yet the pact had not escaped her. It had found her here in the wild, in the shadows, in the heart of the mountains. And she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that this was only the beginning. The mountains roared again, and the first brother whispered, "Your fate is waiting, chosen, whether you accept it or not." Leora swallowed hard, eyes wide, as the mist curled around them. She could feel the storm gathering, the unseen forces awakening. Her flight had brought her here, to the edge of survival, to the edge of choice, and perhaps, to the edge of something she had never expected, the beginning of a bond that could either save her or break her entirely. The wind carried her own whispered defiance back to her ears. I will choose for myself. But as the triplets closed the circle, the first roar transformed into something more, a warning, a challenge, and a promise that she could not ignore. And so the hunt began. The mist lingered low in the mountains, curling around the jagged peaks like silver smoke. Leora's heart still raced from the night before, when the triplets had appeared as if the mountains themselves had called them. She had thought she could run, thought she could hide, but the truth had revealed itself. Running could no longer save her. She clutched her dagger tightly and moved through the narrow passes, careful of every loose stone beneath her feet. The cold air stung her lungs, but she welcomed it. It kept her mind sharp. Every shadow seemed to flicker with movement. Every rustle in the trees made her senses leap. She had survived the city, survived the palace, and survived the mountains so far. Yet something in the peaks felt alive, watching her, guiding her, and warning her. Then she saw him. The first brother, the one who had extended his hand in the shadows, stood ahead, his silhouette partially hidden behind a crag of stone. He did not move, only watched her as if expecting her to hesitate. His eyes were piercing, yet not unkind. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I am not alone," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "The mountains are my company." He tilted his head, studying her. "The mountains are alive, yes, but they are not enough to protect you, not from me and not from them." He gestured behind him, where the faint shapes of the other two brothers lingered in the fog, silent, watchful, impossible to ignore. Leora's stomach tightened. She had known they would come, but seeing them together, three of them, strong, silent, and commanding, made her realize the truth of the stories. Each of the brothers carried an air of authority, but also of pain. Their faces told stories she could not yet understand, stories of loss, rivalry, and longing hidden beneath a mask of control. "I do not wish to be taken," she said firmly. "I do not belong to any pact, and I will not belong to you." The first brother smiled faintly. "No one does willingly," he said, "but sometimes destiny chooses before we can." Before she could respond, the second brother emerged from the mist, his movements fluid and precise, almost predatory. He stopped a few steps away, his eyes sharp, assessing her, weighing her strength. Leora felt a shiver run down her spine, but she did not lower her dagger. She would not show fear. "You are brave," he said, his voice low, almost teasing. "Or foolish, perhaps both." "And who are you to judge?" Leora shot back. He smirked, but there was something unreadable in his gaze. "One who must," he said simply. "We are triplets. Our duty, our burden is to find the chosen, and now you are it." The third brother appeared then, silent as a shadow, almost ethereal in the morning mist. He moved closer, each step deliberate, and looked at her with a gaze that seemed to pierce her very soul. There was curiosity, yes, but also recognition. As if he had known her long before she had been born, as if he had waited for her arrival. "You fear us," he said softly. "I should," she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "You are strangers. You are dangerous. And yet, I do not know why, but I feel as though you are not entirely what you seem." The three of them exchanged a brief glance, subtle but charged, and Leora realized that they had a connection she could not yet comprehend. They were bound not just by blood, but by some unspoken understanding, some shared past of pain and loyalty that went beyond words. "Come," the first brother said finally. "There is a place deeper in the mountains, safe for now. We will speak there." Leora hesitated. Her instincts screamed to run, to find another hidden path to escape again. But something in his voice, and in the steady way the third brother watched her, told her that perhaps, just perhaps, she could survive by staying. They moved as one, silently navigating the treacherous paths. The mist thickened, curling around them, and the air grew colder, sharper. Leora noticed the subtle differences between the brothers. The first was cautious, protective. The second was commanding, daring. The third was quiet, almost haunted, but radiated a strength that was calm and unyielding. Hours passed as they climbed higher into the mountains. Leora could feel the tension building, not just between herself and the triplets, but between the triplets themselves. There were glances exchanged, words left unspoken, a silent struggle for control that mirrored the storm within her own heart. She felt caught between them, drawn to their strength, yet wary of their power. Finally, they reached a plateau high above the valleys below. A small, ruined temple sat at the edge, half hidden by frost-covered pines and mist. It was ancient, weathered by time, but still held a sense of solemn power. The first brother motioned for her to enter. Inside, the air was warmer, but heavy with the scent of incense and old stone. Leora ran her fingers along the carved walls, feeling the energy that pulsed faintly through them. She realized that the mountains themselves held a memory, a presence that was both protective and dangerous. "You are stronger than you know," the first brother said, watching her. "But strength alone will not save you." "And what will?" she asked, glancing at the second and third brothers, both observing her with unreadable expressions. "Trust," the third brother said softly. His voice was calm, yet it carried weight, a truth she could not ignore. "Trust in yourself, and in the bond that fate has set before you. Only then will the curse that follows you have any meaning, and only then can you survive." The words made her stomach twist. Trust had always led to betrayal in her life. Her family's curse, the pact itself, all had proven that. And yet, she sensed something in him, in all three of them, that made her question everything she had ever believed. Could she allow herself even a flicker of hope? Before she could answer, the temple trembled. A distant roar echoed through the mountains, louder than before, shaking the very stone beneath their feet. Leora's heart pounded. She looked at the triplets, and for the first time she saw a flicker of fear in their eyes, just a flicker, quickly hidden, but enough to tell her that the threat was real, that the mountains were alive and aware, and that the supernatural forces here were not to be taken lightly. The second brother moved to the temple entrance, his body tense, ready to defend. "It is coming," he said, voice low, controlled, "and it will test all of us." Leora felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had fled danger her entire life, yet now, in the heart of the mountains, she felt a pull toward something greater than herself. The triplets were not just hunters or captors. They were guardians, warriors bound by duty and perhaps by something more. Hours passed, the mist outside thickening, shadows shifting with the rising sun. The triplets taught her small lessons, guiding her through the ruins, showing her hidden paths, warning her of traps and dangers that lurked in the mountains. Slowly, Leora began to understand that the mountains themselves were alive, and that survival required more than strength. It required awareness, cunning, and a willingness to trust. And then, late in the afternoon, the second brother stepped forward, his voice low, almost a whisper. "There is something you must see." He led her deeper into the temple, where a hidden chamber lay beneath a crumbling staircase. The walls were lined with carvings, ancient symbols that pulsed faintly with light. In the center of the room stood a basin of water, black as night, reflecting their faces in distorted shapes. "This is the mirror of fates," the third brother explained, stepping beside her. "It shows what was, what is, and what may come. But be warned, the truths it reveals are not always easy to accept." Leora leaned over the basin, peering into the water. At first, she saw only her own reflection, pale and tired, eyes wide with fear and determination. Slowly the surface shifted, revealing images she could not fully comprehend. The triplets standing in a circle, hands joined, shadows moving through the mountains, flashes of fire, wind, and storm. And then a glimpse of herself, bound by a glowing, ethereal chain to one of the brothers, their faces close, expressions mingling defiance and longing. Her breath caught. "Is this fate?" she whispered. The first brother's hand brushed against hers almost accidentally, almost intentionally. "It is one possibility," he said softly. "Fate is not set, but it can guide, warn, and protect. The choice always remains yours." And yet, Leora realized that choice had never felt so complicated. She was caught between fear and fascination, between the desire to run and the desire to understand, between the triplets, power and their vulnerability, their duty and their longing. She was drawn to them in ways she did not yet understand, in ways that made her pulse race and her heart ache. Suddenly, the temple shook again, more violently than before. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a low, haunting roar echoed through the mountains. The triplets' eyes met, each silently communicating, silently preparing. Leora felt the energy in the room shift, thickening, pressing against her chest. The mountains were alive and they were angry. "You cannot hide from destiny," the third brother said, his voice calm, steady, yet filled with an undeniable urgency. "The storm is coming, and with it choices will be made." Leora swallowed hard, gripping her dagger. She had come to these mountains to escape, to claim her freedom, and yet freedom had never felt so distant. The triplets stood around her, each a living embodiment of power, danger, and something softer, deeper, almost human. She realized with a twist of fear and excitement that she was not just being hunted or protected, she was being tested. The mountains roared once more, echoing through the peaks like a living heartbeat. And Leora knew, with a certainty that chilled her blood, that her life would never be the same. The storm was rising, and so was the bond that could either save her or break her completely. The storm in the mountains had not passed. Instead, it seemed to grow heavier, darker, as if the peaks themselves were alive, aware of every step Leora took. Rain slashed across the rocky paths and wind tore at her cloak, yet she pressed forward, her heart both frightened and strangely exhilarated. She had been led deeper into the mountains by the triplets, past hidden paths and crumbling ruins, to a place older than memory, a temple carved into the heart of the cliffs, bathed in the green glow of moss and strange crystals that pulsed with life. "This is the heart of the mountains," the first brother said, his voice cutting through the roar of wind. His dark eyes scanned the surroundings, alert. "Here, the pact is strongest. Here, you will see what it truly demands and what it can give." Leora shivered. She remembered her mother's warnings. The pact was not a promise of comfort or glory. It was a bond that tested the soul, that forced choices no ordinary heart could endure. And yet the triplets had guided her here carefully, almost as if they were giving her a chance to see, to choose, to survive. The second brother moved forward, placing a hand on the ancient stone wall. The carvings glimmered under his touch, as if recognizing him. "Many have come here before," he said, voice low, "and many have left changed if they survived at all. This is no ordinary trial. The mountains will test your strength, your heart, and your will." Leora's fingers tightened around her dagger. "I am ready," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I will not fail." The third brother stepped beside her, calm and quiet, though she could sense the storm inside him. "Strength alone is not enough," he said softly. "The pact demands trust, sacrifice, and sometimes courage you do not know you possess. You will face choices that seem impossible, but remember, whatever you decide, it must come from your heart." She nodded, swallowing hard. She did not fully understand what lay ahead, but she could feel the weight of destiny pressing down, a pressure both terrifying and intoxicating. They moved into the temple, where the walls were etched with ancient symbols that seemed to shift and move in the flickering torchlight. The air smelled of damp stone and old magic, and Leora felt it prickling against her skin, tugging at her mind, whispering secrets she could not fully hear. Suddenly, a shadow flitted across the floor and Leora froze. She looked up to see the first brother standing with his hand extended, motioning for her to follow. "Do not fear," he said. "This is part of the trial. You must see it for yourself." They descended a narrow staircase, spiraling deep into the cliffs. The walls narrowed, enclosing them in darkness, until finally they stepped into a vast chamber. The ceiling arched high above, shrouded in mist, and in the center of the room was a pool of water, black as midnight. Its surface rippled even though there was no wind. "The pool of truths," the second brother explained. "It shows not only what is but what may come. It reveals the bond of the pact and the consequences of every choice you might make. Few have looked into it and walked away unchanged." Leora approached cautiously. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and frightened. But as she leaned closer, the water shifted, revealing images that made her gasp. She saw herself, bound by glowing chains, her hand held by one of the triplets. She saw storms, fire, and shadows, and she saw herself standing alone, struggling, falling, and rising again. "Is this real?" she whispered. The third brother stepped beside her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "It shows possibilities," he said. "Not all of them will come to pass, but some cannot be avoided. The pact will demand choice, and each choice has a price." Her heart ached. She had come to escape fate, to claim freedom, and yet here it was, laid bare in the water. Destiny was not something she could outrun. And yet something stirred in her chest, a strange, cautious hope. Perhaps she could survive, perhaps she could shape her own path. Before she could dwell on the visions, a sudden tremor shook the chamber. Water splashed against the walls, and the torch flames flickered wildly. The storm above seemed to penetrate even this sanctuary. Leora's pulse raced, and she glanced at the triplets. They were tense, poised, alert. Each brother radiated strength, and each carried his own burden in the set of his shoulders, the tightness of his jaw, the controlled fury in his eyes. Leora felt both fear and fascination. They were not just protectors or hunters. They were powerful, dangerous, and human. The first brother's voice cut through the chaos. "The mountains are not pleased. They will test you now, Leora. Not just your body, but your heart, your courage, your will. Stand together with us, or stand alone and face what lies ahead." Leora took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The air was thick with magic, the kind that pressed against her chest and made it hard to think clearly. But she remembered their words: trust, courage, and choice. Perhaps that was her only way forward. The chamber trembled again, and the water in the pool rose, swirling into shapes that twisted and turned. Shadows emerged from its depths, faint, ghostly figures that resembled humans but moved with unnatural grace. They circled the triplets and Leora, whispering in voices that made her skin crawl. "Do not be afraid," the first brother said, stepping in front of her. "They are echoes of the pact, trials meant to measure your heart and resolve." The second brother drew a small blade from his belt, its edge glinting in the flickering light. "Stand your ground," he said. "Let them see that you are not easily broken." The third brother moved silently, eyes fixed on the shadows, every muscle coiled, ready to act. "Feel the bond," he said softly, almost to Leora alone. "You are not truly alone. Trust in us and in yourself." The shadows lunged, swirling around Leora in a whirlwind of movement. She raised her dagger instinctively, slashing at the illusions, but they passed through her as if they were nothing. Panic rose, but she drew in a deep breath, remembering the triplets' words. She focused, opening herself to the connection she felt, not just to the brothers but to the energy of the mountains, to the pulse of the ancient temple. Slowly, the shadows faltered. They twisted and writhed, then recoiled, as if recognizing her strength. The first brother's hand brushed against hers, not in command but in solidarity. She felt a surge of courage, a bond forming, subtle yet undeniable. The shadows dissipated into mist, leaving the chamber silent but for the sound of the storm outside. Leora's chest heaved, her legs weak, but a sense of triumph pulsed through her. She had survived the trial, not by fleeing, not by fighting alone, but by standing with the triplets and trusting in some small way in herself. The first brother nodded at her, approval in his eyes. "Well done," he said quietly. The second brother gave a faint smile. "You are stronger than I expected," he admitted, though his eyes still held that sharp, assessing edge. The third brother lingered, gazing at her with intensity, a complexity in his expression that made her pulse quicken. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "The mountains will continue to test you, and so will the pact." Leora realized he was right. She had survived one trial, but the challenges were far from over. The triplets were not enemies, but they were not entirely allies either. They were forces as powerful as the mountains themselves, and navigating their strength, their desires, and their secrets would be another challenge entirely. As they prepared to leave the chamber, the storm outside began to wail even louder. Lightning illuminated the mountains in stark, sharp flashes, revealing cliffs, trees, and shadows that seemed alive. The triplets led her to the edge of the temple, where a narrow path descended toward the lower valleys. "This path will take us to the next stage," the first brother said. "There, the pack's influence will grow stronger. You will face choices that cannot be ignored. And you must decide what kind of chosen you will become." Leora swallowed hard. She had always believed that freedom meant running. Now she realized that true freedom might demand courage, trust, and even sacrifice. The second brother's hand brushed against her arm as they walked, almost accidentally, almost intentionally. She felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, hope, longing, or perhaps the thrill of shared danger. The third brother's eyes never left her, intense and watchful. She sensed his thoughts, unspoken, and for the first time she wondered if he had known her long before this journey began. As night fell, the triplets set up a small camp on a rocky ledge overlooking the valley. The storm had passed momentarily, leaving a silence so profound that every sound, the rustle of trees, the distant cry of a mountain hawk, felt magnified. Leora sat by the fire, hands wrapped around the warmth, and let her thoughts drift. She had survived the pool of truths, faced the shadows of the pact, and stood with the triplets. And yet, she knew the path ahead would be far more dangerous, far more testing. The mountains had revealed part of her destiny, but they had not shown all of it. The first brother watched her quietly, a presence both comforting and commanding. The second cleaned his blade, silent but alert, ready for any threat. The third leaned against a rock, his gaze fixed on her, deep and searching. Leora felt the weight of their eyes, the pull of their strength, and something stirring in her chest she could not name. She realized that the triplets were not just part of her trial, they were entwined with it. Her fate, the pact, and the mountains themselves were all connected in ways she did not yet understand. And the choices she made in the coming days could change everything. Her life, the triplets, and perhaps even the mountains themselves. As she closed her eyes that night, listening to the whisper of the wind through the peaks, she whispered a vow to herself. "I will not be broken. I will not be lost. And I will choose my own path, no matter what the pact demands." But as the fire flickered and the mountains loomed dark and vast around her, she knew with a sinking certainty that the storm was far from over, and the next test would demand everything she had to give. The valley lay shrouded in mist as dawn broke, pale light slipping over jagged peaks. Leora's breath came in shallow gasps, the cold air biting at her skin. She had slept little, her mind restless with visions from the pool of truths and the weight of the triplets' presence beside her. Tonight, or perhaps today, her choices would determine not only her fate but the fate of the mountains, the pact, and those she had come to trust. The triplets rose silently, moving with the precision of hunters. Each bore the same grim determination in their eyes. This would be the ultimate test. Leora followed, heart pounding, knowing that the next stage of the trial would push her beyond fear, beyond doubt, into the heart of her courage. They arrived at the entrance to a hidden cavern, carved deep into the cliffs. Its mouth yawned like a black maw, tendrils of mist curling from within. The mountains seemed to hum, alive with energy, as if the very rocks recognized the momentous decision about to unfold. "The pack's influence is strongest here," the first brother said, voice calm yet heavy with meaning. "Inside, you will face the truths you have been running from. You may be tested physically, emotionally, and spiritually. But remember, your strength lies not only in your body but in your heart." Leora tightened her cloak around her shoulders. She had learned much in the mountains. That fear was a choice, that trust could be an act of courage, and that the triplets were more than hunters. They were protectors, guides, and perhaps mirrors to the parts of herself she had long denied. The second brother stepped forward, his eyes sharp as he scanned the darkness ahead. "We will face this together," he said. "The shadows are not your enemies alone. Stand with us and you may survive." The third brother's gaze met hers, deep and searching. "And remember," he said softly, "whatever you see here, whatever you face, you are not alone. Not now, not ever." The cavern swallowed them in shadows. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth, dripping cold water into shallow pools. The air smelled of earth, damp stone, and something older, ancient magic, alive and aware. Leora followed closely, senses heightened, every step deliberate. She felt the pulse of the mountains, felt the energy thrumming beneath her feet, as if the land itself awaited her decision. Suddenly the cavern floor trembled. A low, haunting growl echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the stone walls. Shadows rose from the pools, dark and fluid, twisting into shapes both human and monstrous. Leora's heart leapt, but she did not falter. She had survived before with the triplets at her side, and she would survive again. The first brother stepped forward, hands raised, a protective barrier of energy shimmering faintly around them. "Do not fear," he said. "These are the echoes of the pact. They will test your heart, your will, and your courage. Stand strong." The shadows lunged. Leora felt their cold, intangible presence brush against her, whispering doubts, fears, and regrets. She raised her dagger, slashing at the illusions, but they passed through her as if she were air. Panic threatened to rise, but she drew a deep, steadying breath. She remembered the lessons of the mountains: trust, courage, and choice. She focused, opening herself to the connection she felt, not only to the triplets but to the mountains, to the ancient energy that pulsed through the stone. Slowly, the shadows faltered, recoiling from her strength and resolve. The first brother's hand brushed against hers, not commanding but supporting. The second moved to intercept a shadow approaching her from the side. The third stood behind her, eyes fixed on the dark forms, radiating calm strength. Together, they held the shadows at bay. Leora felt a surge of power, a bond forming with the triplets and the mountains themselves. She realized that the pact was not just a burden, it was a guide, a mirror, a challenge meant to awaken the courage buried deep within her. As the shadows dissipated, the cavern walls began to shimmer with a faint green light. From the depths of the stone, a figure emerged, taller than any human, radiating power and authority. Its eyes glowed with the same green energy as the walls, and its voice echoed in every corner of the cavern. "Chosen," it said, "you have faced the shadows and you have survived, yet the true test lies ahead. To break the curse that binds your family, you must confront the pact itself. You must choose freedom or binding, trust or defiance. Your heart will decide and the mountains will answer." Leora swallowed, her throat tight. She had spent her life running, hiding, resisting the fate others demanded. Now, standing before this ancient force, she understood the truth. Freedom was not the absence of choice. Freedom was the courage to make a choice, even when every path seemed impossible. The triplets flanked her, their presence both steadying and electrifying. She felt their strength, their devotion, and their unspoken longing. Each of them carried their own burdens, the first with caution and care, the second with fire and daring, the third with quiet, unwavering focus. But together they were a shield and a mirror, reflecting her own courage back at her. The first brother spoke, voice steady. "Whatever you choose, you must own it. The mountains will respond to your heart, not your fear. The second brother added, and remember, you are not alone. You have us. Trust us and trust yourself. The third brother's gaze held hers, deep and intense. Your heart will guide you. Follow it. Leora took a deep breath and stepped forward toward the glowing figure. She reached out with her mind and heart, opening herself fully to the energy of the mountains, the triplets, and the pact. The light pulsed brighter, responding to her courage, her willingness to face truth without fear. Visions flooded her mind, her family, their suffering, the generations of fear and pain, but also moments of love, of resilience, of hope. She saw herself standing tall, choosing not to flee, choosing not to let the pact dictate her life, but to bind it to her will, to use it to protect, to heal, to grow. The glowing figure lowered its head, acknowledging her resolve. You have chosen wisely, chosen. The curse may be lifted, but the pact will always be part of you. It is neither chains nor prison, but a path. Walk it with courage, and you will find strength beyond imagining. A wave of energy surged through the cavern, lifting Leora off her feet for a moment before she landed gently, unscathed. She felt lighter, freer, and stronger than ever before. The triplets closed around her, relief and admiration in their eyes, but also something deeper, a bond that had grown through struggle, trust, and mutual respect. The first brother extended his hand, and she took it, feeling the connection pulse between them. The second brother's hand brushed hers briefly, and she felt warmth and strength. The third brother stood close, his gaze unwavering, his presence steady and comforting. For the first time, Leora understood the full measure of the triplets' power, not just in their strength, but in their loyalty, their courage, and their willingness to stand together, even when the path was uncertain. They emerged from the cavern together, the mountains calm now, as if approving of her choice. The storm had passed, leaving the peaks bathed in the golden light of sunrise. The mist curled around them gently, and the air felt alive with promise and renewal. Leora stood at the edge of the cliff, looking out over the valleys below. She had faced fear, darkness, and the weight of destiny. She had chosen courage over flight, trust over suspicion, and strength over doubt. She had survived not by avoiding the triplets, but by standing with them, learning from them, and allowing herself to feel, to hope, and to connect. The first brother's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "You have done well," he said softly. The second brother nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You are stronger than you realize. The mountains have accepted your choice, and so have we." The third brother's gaze lingered on her, intense and searching. "You have proven yourself, not just to us, but to yourself. Never forget that." Leora smiled, a genuine, bright smile that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She had come to the mountains to escape, to hide, and to resist her destiny. Instead, she had found strength, connection, and a new understanding of what freedom truly meant. The triplets flanked her, and together they descended the mountains, their bond stronger than any fear, any curse, any trial. Leora knew the pact would always be part of her, but it no longer controlled her. She had chosen her path, and in doing so, she had claimed not only her freedom, but a place among those she had once feared. As they walked toward the valley, the sun rising behind the peaks, Leora felt a sense of peace, tempered with the thrill of adventure and discovery. The mountains had tested her, the triplets had guided her, and she had faced the darkness, and emerged stronger, braver, and free. And for the first time, she realized that the true bond of the mountains, the pact, and the triplets was not one of fear or obligation, but of trust, courage, and a promise that together they could face whatever the future held. The wind whispered through the peaks, gentle now, carrying with it a sense of hope, renewal, and the quiet magic of a destiny chosen by the heart. Leora smiled, looking at the triplets beside her, knowing that whatever came next she would face it, not alone, but with those who had become her family, her allies, and perhaps something more. The mountains had taught her the hardest lesson of all. that true strength was not in fleeing but in standing firm, and in choosing with courage and heart the path she was meant to walk.